Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm off of Cold Spring Lane, right where it intersects the Jones Falls Expressway. I'm at a place called Camp Small. For many years, this was basically a dumping ground for trees that came from the city's streets and parks. But for the last several years, it's been a hub of innovation, turning those same trees into valuable wood products like mulch and firewood and hardwood. If you're following along real time, you know that about a week ago, Camp Small had a tremendous fire, a cold and windy night, the same night that the fireworks were canceled for the annual monument lighting. We don't know what caused the fire or how extensive it was. We hope that Camp Small gets back up and running quickly. But all of the press around it got us wondering what was the history of this place, and particularly that unusual name, Camp Small. And that's where we'll start. In fact, we're going to start back at the Civil War. April 12th, 1861, pro-Southern forces fired on the military outpost at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. A week later, April 19th, 1861, Army troops marching along Pratt Street were attacked by Southern sympathizers here in Baltimore, called the Pratt Street Riots or the Baltimore Riots. And just a few weeks later, a bridge over the Jones Falls right here was blown up, presumably by pro-Southern sympathizers trying to halt the transportation of troops from the north to the south. But Abraham Lincoln was going to have none of this blowing up of bridges and quickly put a military post here to make sure that when the bridge was rebuilt that it wouldn't be blown up again. Lincoln was keen on using the railroad for the war and put military outposts in several places, including at Mount Clair in today's Carroll Park in West Baltimore. But here the troops stayed to guard the bridge. It was a bridge of the Northern Central Railway, which had completed its network of tracks just before the Civil War. Its purpose was really to get grain and lumber and coal from central Pennsylvania to Baltimore and our busy port. And during the Civil War, it in fact did play a pretty important role in transporting troops, so important that Confederate soldiers blew up other bridges of the NCR Railroad in York, Pennsylvania on their way to the Battle of Gettysburg. So what about the name Camp Small? Well, it was originally called Camp Melvale or Melville, depending on which historical record you look at. Melvale was the station stop here along the Northern Central Railway, but eventually it became known as Camp Small after Charles Small, a property owner here. Now, we don't know everything about Charles Small, but the historical record does show that in 1889 he was part of a committee that was laying memorials on Confederate grave sites in Baltimore cemeteries. And in 1893 he was part of a celebration of Robert E. Lee's birthday at the old Carrollton Hotel. So while we don't know the extent of his involvement for the South in the Civil War, we know at the very least he was a very public pro-Confederate sympathizer. So it seems like an easy decision for Union troops to confiscate his land here and set up a Union camp to guard a very important bridge into and out of Baltimore. The regiment that was set up here, incidentally, was the 87th Regiment, volunteers out of Pennsylvania, York. The bridge lasted throughout the war, as did the NCR Railroad, up until 1972, when Hurricane Agnes destroyed much of its tracks, particularly in the Baltimore region, that were never really rebuilt. But we know the NCR Trail today. If you're on the light rail heading out of Camden Station, going to Timonium, that's the path you take. And then the wonderful NCR Trail, now called the Torrey Brown Trail, further up in Baltimore County, the hiking and biking path that's one of the great rails to trails here. So after the Civil War, Camp Small sort of remained as a meadow for a long time. In the 1950s and early 60s, the city contemplated buying it to turn it into what they called the Jones Falls Park, but they didn't have enough money to do it, so we never got a Jones Falls Park. But in 1965, the city's chief horticulturist, Gerard Modray, saw an opportunity, and he asked all of the city folks that were picking up leaves to dump them here, and he turned it into a giant compost pile, turning the leaves into rich organic matter that he used on flower beds and gardens throughout the city. But eventually the compost pile became just a dumping ground for all sorts of parts of trees that were picked up throughout the city. That is until 2016, when the city's Department of Recreation and Parks, the folks in charge of our trees, and the Office of Sustainability got a grant through the city to turn this place into an innovation hub led by a gentleman named Sean Preston. They created a center that with the goal of having a zero waste. They would use all of the leaves and branches and trunks and roots of trees for productive uses, like turning them into mulch, into firewood, and into hardwood lumber. That they would either give or sell to other city agencies or to private folks. So places like the new Cahill Recreation Center saved $100,000 using wood coming out of Camp Small, and then loads of wonderful furniture from private folks like Sandtown Millworks getting their lumber here as well. Each year, Camp Small generates about $100,000 in profit, which is really remarkable, but even more remarkable considering that before this, the city was spending $75,000 every year or two to pay a private contractor to come and chip up the wood that had gotten too mountainous for the 5-acre site. So I'm going to wrap up and say that the next time you're driving up or down I-83 near Cold Spring, maybe slow down a little, take a look over at the great pile of lumber here, and say some kind words for Camp Small on a speedy recovery so that these innovative and entrepreneurial folks can get back to doing so much good for Baltimore City. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.